Hello, and welcome to the Expanse. This is part 2 of the Cosmology Explained, a continuation of part 1, which basically explains why the cosmology map does make sense. After the short introduction, this will continue on from where part 1 should have continued on from. If you like this content and you'd like to see more, hit the like and subscribe button. If you'd like to stay notified, hit the bell or follow me on Twitter. Timestamps are provided in the description if you'd like to skip to a certain subject. I will state now that this is my opinion, and there will be some interpretation and speculation. I also need to thank Locke from Shinies and Luckydos, for without her, the ideas of this explanation/speculation/theory would never have been fleshed out. So from here on, we're entering more speculative territory, because I am under the impression we are having really scary concepts and new big bads hinted to us in-game at the moment. And the only way I can explain them is by adding spectrums of magic on top of the RMIs, which by the end of this basically creates the fifth ring of influence I mentioned before. As a warning right now though, this makes the map annoyingly complex. I mean, I don't find it annoying because I find this stuff interesting, but anyway, the map is still legible, but these spectrums just add another layer of concept to take in when looking at this map. So, the spectrums I'm talking about cut the cosmology in half, then they cut it in half again, and then they cut it in half again. Then you add another set of terms to those halves, and you get the spectrums. The first cut creates the spectrum of Aether, a higher form of light, and the Abyss, a higher form of the Void. This spectrum mostly relates to the fourth ring, the Ring of Magics, and puts order, death, and the Void on the Abyssal spectrum, and disorder, life, and light on the Aether spectrum. I figure this spectrum is a thing because for the strangest reason, of all the magics, Fel seems to be the absolute bane of life. As in, re-origination is bad, but life can survive in a desert. Hell, even Lei Shen's body survived in a desert. Things can survive in death, apparently. Fel, though, is not only fueled by life, it also pretty much corrupts and or destroys it. I mean, take the soul engines and what Felfire actually does to the environment around it. It basically salts and taints the earth, making the ability to grow anything extremely difficult and or extremely dangerous. Comparably, you also have the Titan of Death, Argus, who seems to be the very antithesis of the order-based pantheon. The question I generally asked was, why are these two things? The answer I came to was this first spectrum, the spectrum of Abyss and Aether. Because if I was to take a guess, if Azeroth, for example, was only influenced by Aether, I would take a bet we would only be influenced by 3 of the major magics. Those magics being life, light, and disorder. And if we were only influenced by the Abyss, we would only have the magics of order, void, and death. What I'm basically saying is that yes, the 6 greater magics do show balance against each other. But what I'm also saying is that the light and the void, in regards to Aether and the Abyss, also have balance within them, as in a greater form of balance in regards to their respective spectrums. Think about it like this. The concept of life in the cosmology is based on renewal and growth, so it never stops spreading until it envelops everything, and renewal and regrowth intrinsically deny the effects of death and decay, as in if something is consistently renewing and regrowing itself, nothing dies. And the question becomes, how do you stop this force? Well, the answer is disorder and destruction. If you leave a plant to grow, it eventually grows out of control. So you trim it. You destroy a piece of it. But, as life in WoW is described, it's consistently regrowing again and again. So you repeat the process, giving destruction a purpose in bringing balance to the universe, giving disorder a purpose in the universe, whilst also having death, which basically acts as the passage of time. There is another theory attached to that statement, but it is, well, it would basically turn this into an hour-long plus video. So that is for another time. The extremes of life and disorder are really bad. All you have to do is look at Legion and Primordial Draenor, but both serve a purpose in opposition to each other, whilst also serving a purpose in opposition to order and death. This spectrum of balance is also the same for order and death. The Titans and their creations in a perfect universe, in a perfect scenario, would never fall to any type of destructive disorder. And so the question is, once again, how do you bring balance to order if there will never be destructive, if they will never fall to disorder? The answer is death, decay, and entropy, all of which come under death in cosmology. The Titans might consider themselves immortal, but the universe obviously doesn't agree. And when you think about how the Titan Forge seem to consistently decay, it heavily implies that where Fel and order are opposites to each other, Fel more encompasses destruction, whereas death, once again, more likely encompasses time, the one thing that would eventually bring destruction to beings of perfect order. And yes, I do swear there is another theory about death having relations to time. But moving on. This idea of the six magics being split between the creation and destruction aspects of Aether and the Abyss actually leads into the second splitting of the cosmology, and the question, why does life and arcane get along? And similarly, why does death and disorder seem so close to one another when we've seen the magics used? The answer I have is I think one side of the spectrum is creation, and on the other side of the spectrum you have destruction. This split is probably most evident in the Titans, and I know they are beings of arcane, but just bear with me. The Pantheon are bringers of life to the universe. They create the Titan Forged, who are basically mechanical life. What we also have, though, is life magic, and the wild gods and the lower, and they also seem to create life. Now, I am 99% certain most, if not all, magics to create life in the universe have to use spirit, but I'm just going to stick to the fourth ring analogy today. So you have arcane and life which create. On the flip side, you have Sargeras, the mad, fel-infused Titan who is using Argus, the Titan of Death, to destroy the universe. If you know the Argus fights, then you know on Mythic difficulty Argus' abilities turn red. In particular, his reorigination modules turn to Apocalypse modules. The question was why? Well, if Argus was a Titan of Death, if he was an aspect of death, but he was naturally like that, that's why he had his blue tinge, then the assumption I'm making is that if Rage still has a connection to Fel and Disorder, then Argus's alignment probably shifted during the fight, as in we made him angry and he turned from a Titan of Death into a fusion, or possibly a reversion, into a Titan of Death and Disorder, a Titan of the Apocalypse, of absolute destruction. To elaborate on that a bit more, the spectrums of creation and destruction basically split the Light and the Void into destructive and creative halves. And as Chronicle 1 actually describes, half of the Void wants the universe so they can create suffering. I'm assuming this is creative half. The other half wants to assumedly end it all. And as we see with the Ethereals and the Old Gods, there does seem to be a very distinct difference between the two. And it's very interesting that we get introduced to these new aspects of the void on Argus, the Titan of Death. By this inference, I am also assuming the light has these separations. However, when it comes to the Naru, I am not 100% certain where they may actually lie, as in whether they lie in the quote-unquote destructive half of the light, or whether they sit on the quote-unquote creative side of the light. But coming back to Argus, if the Aether and Abyss spectrums are correct, then when we defeated Argus, we literally defeated, quite possibly, the most dangerous creature in the universe, because Argus had turned into the cumulative negative aspects of Aether, the light, and the Abyss, the void, making him, or making what he could have turned into, way worse than the old gods and the Naru, and that's not including the fact that he still may be out there. Ironically, this also explains Yogg-Saron's self-proclaimed god of Deathline, as his maw is on the side of destruction when it comes to the abyssal spectrum on the cosmology map. So, if this theory is correct, then this kind of confirms the suspicion Yogg-Saron had way more to do with death than was first revealed back in Wrath of the Lich King, and his role in regards to Bolvar is far from done. The last spectrum, and the spectrum I think Blizz is going to very, very slowly illuminate, but is definitely doing so now, are the spectrums of Fae and Oblivion. As you've probably noticed with the spectrums of Creation and Destruction, they line up with two semicircles that lie at the edges of the cosmology map. And if you remember from the beginning, I did mention the 4 RPG symbols in the corners. If Fae and Oblivion turn out to be a thing, then that's what 2 of the symbols in the corners represent. Now, I'm assuming anyone who has made it this far already knows the light, arcane, and life magics are never regularly at odds. I mean, if anything, there seems to be things in the universe that imply they have a lot more in common than you'd first think. Elune, Cenarius, and Malorn probably being the best examples of this. I am saying there is a connection between these magics, and that connection is the spectrum of Fae, which is basically a fusion, or once again a reversion to an older form of magic, which basically takes the creation aspects, or the creative aspects of the universe, and fuses them into one. That fusion being Fae magic. The only way I can really explain Fae magic is calling it origin magic, as in the origin of absolutely everything. Light, void, absolutely everything. And as you've probably figured out, the spectrum of Oblivion is the complete opposite to origin magic, as in the Abyss is bad, as in spectrum of the Abyss, pure void is bad, but it's a place. It has entities within it. Nightmarish entities, but entities all the same. Oblivion, from what I can gather, is nothingness, as in no light, no shadow, no nothing. Or, if there is something, to put it bluntly, it's everything's worst nightmare. It's basically Oblivion. If I am right about these concepts of Fae and Oblivion, well, I guess the first thing is the chains on the cosmology map make perfect sense, because the 2 places they turn up are where 2 of the most destructive and most unwanted magics in the universe would appear. And if long, long ago, some being locked destruction and oblivion away so they would never influence existence, or outside of existence, or anything ever again, I'm not going to complain, and I wouldn't be surprised. But this cosmology map is also a very, very stark warning, if that is what the chains represent, because of all the places to have an image outreaching the boundaries of the cosmology, there just happens to be the most evident one in the death section of the Cosmology map, verging on Shadow. I know the general first thought as well in regards to Oblivion is, how does this relate to Sylvanas? But honestly, until I get confirmation of where Kel'Thuzad is, I'm going to be more worried about him coming back than any other character. Also, if Oblivion is a thing, then the Shadowlands may actually have a positive purpose in the universe. That purpose being that whatever created it was using it as a spirit catcher so souls would never reach true oblivion and/or true destruction. Though there is also the possibility the Shadowlands is a lesser extension of Oblivion, making it a really, really bad place to be. If you're also after a possible reason as to why Sargeras was considered the Mad Titan and how the Legion seems to have connections to the Nightmare, well, this may actually explain it in regards to the spectrum of Oblivion, as in the Legion's forces use Fel, Shadow, and Death, all hallmarks of the Oblivion spectrum. And whether Sargeras knows it or not, with the Legion, Sargeras may have actually been bringing a permanent end, instead of just scouring the universe of life. And/or he may have just been tapping into the destructive spectrum of the cosmology, which would have brought about the same thing, though this could all be counteracted by the fact that Sargeras may actually know of Oblivion and has had a plan to fight it all along. So that is the cosmology map explained. To quickly recap what we just went through, spectrums are a more speculative concept, but what they explain is another set of greater and larger reaching primordial forces. Forces which may be playing a role in certain unexplainable connections like the Legion and the Nightmare, and may have been influencing the fate of Azeroth for quite some time. So, do you think this is plausible or possible? Leave a comment. The best speculation is always done with community. If you prefer to talk about your lore though, I usually hang out in the Shinies and Luckydos Discord, and even if I'm not there, the small community that is usually around is amazing to talk lore, speculation, and anything World of Warcraft with. Until next time though, have a nice day!